Welcome back to our podcast, Let's Talk About Labor. This podcast aims to help farmers and ag businesses connect with other ag businesses, specifically to hear and learn about their experiences and challenges related to labor and the strategies they have used to overcome these challenges. We talk about various topics such as U.S. temporary foreign visa programs, mechanization and automation, and worker recruitment and retention strategies, among other topics. Different agencies and organizations partner with us to make this podcast possible, including the Southern Risk Management Education Center, Gap Connections, the U.S. Department of Agriculture SCRI program, the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development, and the University of Florida Farm Labor Supervisor Certification. My name is Margarita Velandia, and I'm a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee. Today, I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today's episode, Theresa Ward, owner and founder of National Agricultural Consultants. National Agriculture Consultants, Inc. is a firm that provides services to ag employers interested in using or currently using the H-2A program, including recruiting H-2A workers, filing paperwork for the H-2A program, and submitting documents requested by the various government agencies that conduct audits. In today's episode, Theresa will discuss with us the H-2A worker certification process, H-2A program audits. It is important to note that in fiscal year 2024, over 80% of the H-2A job certifications requested by Tennessee ag employers, rather than H-2A labor contractors, were handled by a third party, such as an agent or a law firm, just like the National Agricultural Consultants. Theresa, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. We're very excited to have you as a guest in our podcast.
Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak about a program that I love and a program that I really believe in.
Awesome. Well, so let's go ahead and start. Um, Theresa, a common question I receive from farmers is, what are the main reasons for a worker application to get rejected? First, briefly discuss with us the worker certification process and then talk about common reasons for application rejections.
So, when we file an application for H-2A workers, we file it with various state DOL, federal DOL, USCIS, immigration, and then we, complete the circle at the U.S. consulate. And so the reason for the steps are to ensure that domestic workers are aware of the job and that they have a fair chance to apply first. So if you're willing to hire a domestic USA H-2A worker from outside of the United States, you should be willing to give the same terms and conditions to a domestic worker. And so we generally start 60 to 75 days before your start date by filing your paperwork with the local employment office. There in Tennessee, it is the Tennessee State Workforce Agency, and they are amazing. We very rarely have issues filing job orders in the state of Tennessee. The staff in your state seem to come from ag or be very educated in agriculture. And so they're the first ones who see your job order. Next, we go to Federal Department of Labor, and the job order is posted online for the entire world to see. And the difference in Chicago in Tennessee is that the analysts in Chicago very often have absolutely no agricultural background, other than going maybe on a hayride or a school field trip to the pumpkin patch. And DOL hires temporary workers during their peak season, and they have very limited training. So the training that they do have is training in the process and not in agricultural. So a lot of times as agents and employers have to help educate that staff. And then once we get them all educated, they rarely return the next year or else they're promoted. And so we start all over again. And so usually when we submit an application, we get a notice of deficiency. And the first few lines in it says your application has been rejected. And what that actually means is that they want something changed. We missed an I, we didn't cross a T, or it could be something major. And they give us 7 days to fix that. So we will then respond to that, and normally your application moves right on along. This is the most common stage that an application gets completely rejected, is that during the process, one of the requirements is workers' compensation and housing inspections. And so we have to submit, workers' compensation that shows that you have got coverage on your start date and that you're going to have coverage throughout your entire season. And a lot of insurance companies have stopped offering insurance to farms that use H-2A or farms such as tobacco farms because they consider them high risk. The next reason is your housing inspection. Why it might pass, it might not pass for the number of workers you're requesting. And there's two separate rules based on when your house was built that you have to follow. If it's built before April of 1980, you've got one set of rules. If it was built after that, you have a totally different set of rules. And then you have to deal with the interpretation of the person who's doing your inspection. Once we get through all of those hoops, we have to go to USCIS and they review your certification documents to make sure you're a bona fide business. And we have to send in tax documents confirming your size. And generally, they have 15 days to make that decision. But if there's something not included or they have a question, it stops the clock and it could take much longer. And your only resource for assistance at that point is a senator or congressman. Once again, y'all have great senators and congressmen in the state of Tennessee. So that's not too burdensome other than having to reach out and contact them and to have to deal with the delay. But once your work visas are approved, then we have to go through USCIS, U.S. Consulate in the country that you're choosing from. A majority of our employers come through Mexico. And so depending on the time of year, it could take a bit to get your appointment scheduled. So the consulate checks workers for background checks, illegal entries, criminal records, if they have a strong tie to stay in Mexico, return after the end of the job. But if something shows up on your background check, then it could take quite a bit to clear that. I mean, it could take 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, or even a year. Sometimes these workers aren't cleared until after the end of your season. And then finally, your last thing you could get delayed at is CBP, Civil Border Patrol. You could go through all of this and your worker get to the border and something show up on their radar that didn't show up on anybody else's, and they reject them and turn them around at the border. So it's all the different places to go through. There's very many places that you could get delayed and stopped.
Wow, this is so fascinating to me, Theresa, because I've been learning about the H-2A program, but you kind of like explain very well the behind the scenes of when an application can get stopped. And because of that, because it could be a cumbersome kind of like process, I usually recommend ag employers new to the H-2A program for them to talk to other ag employers who have experience using the H-2A program and work with an agent or a firm with a solid track record of obtaining job certifications to make sure they can jump all those hoops in a kind of like smooth way. So, when working with an agent or firm, what are the common fees that employers have to pay to agents or firms helping them with the job certification process?
So all agents are different and all agents charge different. So I can address how NAC charges. So we charge a retainer and then we bill you for your expenses. And the retainer varies. It depends on how many workers you're going to get, the number of orders that you have to file. But the retainer covers, our staff following your paperwork and then providing you with compliance assistance throughout the season. And whether or not you have an agent or you're trying to do it on your own, there are going to be, quite a few fees to various agencies. And H-2A is not cheap labor like you hear about in the news article. So, DOL is going to charge you a certification fee, and they're going to charge the farm $100 and $10 per visa. And so if you have an order for 5 H-2A workers, your bills will be $150. And then we've got USCIS, who is going to charge based on your size. And so a small farm is going to pay $460 with a $300 amnesty fee. And a large farm is going to pay $530 with a $600 amnesty fee. If you use a recruiter, which is highly recommended, which is outside of the United States, that cost is going to vary depending where the worker's coming from, the amount of assistance that they're giving them. So, workers recruited in Mexico, you're going to pay $85 a worker for, but workers recruited out of South Africa, you're going to pay $350 for. You also have to reimburse the workers for their visa fee. Currently, it's $205 and it's $6 to cross the border. The regulations say door-to-door reimbursement, most economical means. So that means the travel from their home to the consulate, the subsistence or what they eat on, their hotel stay, and then travel back to your farm. I recommend when growers are budgeting for the first time that they budget in $1,200 per worker for incoming and outgoing. You'd rather be on the heavy side and come out good at the end, but talk to your neighbors using the program. Find out what they're paying. So if your neighbor says they're paying $3,000 and you get an agent that quotes you $1,000, something's not right. You need to dig deeper. You need to get the details. This could be a case of it is too good to be true. And if someone's offering to recruit workers for you for free, they're probably charging the worker and you're going to be held responsible for it.
Oh my God, Teresa, this is the first time that we actually had a long conversations because we have known each other for very many years, but you are just a wealth of knowledge about the H-2A program. So I'm very excited you are giving us all this information. Now
Well,
let's
thank
talk
you.
let's talk about the common government audits your clients go through. Explain to us why ag employers using the H-2A visa program get audited and describes some of the common audits they have to go through and general tips on how to prepare for these audits.
So when you sign up for H-2A, you're inviting any government, federal, state agency to just show up on your farm unannounced. So the purpose of the H-2A program is to supply temporary workers to your farm and not displace domestic workers. And so in order to do that, they have to perform audits. Now, these audits are pretty invasive. Every state usually targets a specific thing each year, and it could be if you're recording hours offered, if your workers are working more than the 20% contract hours. But anytime you have an audit, you have a right to be represented by an attorney. And you want an attorney who specializes in H-2A. You don't want Cousin Benny, who helped you with your speeding ticket. And there's numerous H-2A employers lawyers in the industry that can assist you. So the most common audit is a wage and hour audit. And there's two different kinds of wage and hour audits. One is someone has filed a complaint against you, and you're not going to know when someone comes up. They're going to say, hey, we're doing an audit. You can sometimes feel it based on some of the questions, but you're not really sure. And the other audit is just industry-wide. Each year, Wage and Hour picks an industry, whether it's tobacco or fruit and vegetables or row crops. And they usually hit all of the farms in that industry in that area. One of the biggest tips I give people is document, document, document. In H-2A, you're guilty until proven innocent. And so you have to prove you've done everything you're supposed to. The next tip I generally tell people is to remain calm. Call your agent. We can start gathering records that they're going to need, which gives you time to key in on the records that we don't have, such as your payroll records. And so the thing to remember is they have a job to do. They want to complete the audit. move as quickly as possible, and get on to the next company. And they're often doing several farms at once. And so they're going to show up unannounced. They're going to be there a day or half a day. And you want to appear cooperative. And, so when they give you that list of documents, you have 72 hours to produce them. But don't wait to the last minute. They can go back 3 years. And they're going to check out the housing where the workers are staying to make sure it's clean and still in compliance. And they're going to check your vehicles that you use to transport your workers. They're going to talk to your workers and see whether or not they're happy. And then you're not going to be allowed to be there for that. That's going to be not in your presence. And so they're going to see if you've paid their way back last year, if you paid their way here. After the audit, they're going to do a closing interview and let you know what issues you have. That's not going to be the time you argue. You just get to sit and listen. And then once you get your letter with your fines, we can file appeals then. And so it could take anywhere from a couple of months or up to a year for that to wrap up. And, the next audit you've got is USCIS. So this is recent. They just started doing these within the last 2 years, but they're very similar to wage and hour. Currently, they're only keyed in on farm labor contractors, but depending on their budgeting, they may have to extend and expand that. However, they aren't they're not ag related either. I mean, last year we had to explain to an investigator for USCIS what workers' compensation was. It doesn't mean the worker could go to the doctor when he had a tummy ache. So the thing when you are in H-2A is it's not if, it's when. And so the best way to be prepared is just keep up with your paperwork on the way, and then it's not going to be so encumbersome when they show up.
Excellent information, Theresa. So be prepared, document, be calm, right? That's kind of like a
Correct.
summary of what you gave to us. So thank you, Theresa, for taking the time to talk to us. It has been a wonderful conversation, and I guess I'll see everybody else on the next episode. Thank you, Theresa.
Thanks.